The show has been on the air since December 17th, 1989, 37 seasons, 803 aired episodes. It is the longest-running animated series in American television history, the longest-running sitcom, and depending on how you want to count it, the longest-running scripted primetime program ever made. Most people watching this have known The Simpsons for as long as they can actually remember. I have. And there's something about that kind of long familiarity with a thing that I find quite interesting to sit with, because there's a specific experience that happens when you've known something for that long. You go back to it, put on an episode you've seen 8 or 10 times, something comfortable, something you half know by heart. And somewhere in the middle of it, you catch something, a line of dialogue that lands differently now you're older, a background detail that suddenly has weight it didn't used to have. A story beat you laughed at as a kid, and now you sit with for a moment quietly and don't quite laugh at in the same way. I find myself doing this with The Simpsons more than with almost anything else, and I don't think that's accidental. The show was built over decades with considerably more depth than its surface suggested. The jokes were always the surface layer. Underneath them, the writers were drawing something more careful. Portraits of people who struggle to say what they mean to each other, of institutions that protect themselves at the expense of the people they're supposed to serve, of patterns that repeat from one generation to the next without anyone in Springfield quite noticing they're repeating. The longer you know the show, the more clearly you can see those portraits. The comedy doesn't stop working, it just becomes less of the point. That's what tonight is. 10 pieces of Simpsons lore that get a little darker every time you revisit them. I want to be clear about what I mean by that, because I'm not talking about mystery box theories or hidden answers. Most of what we're going to cover is sitting right there in the episodes, in plain sight, visible to anyone who's watched enough of the show. The darkness is the kind that comes from understanding something fully, from knowing a show well enough that the emotional undercurrent stops being background noise and starts being the main thing you're actually paying attention to. We've gone deep on a lot of Simpsons material on this channel already. The radiation theory, the floating timeline, the Burns immortality question, the Tamzarian identity. Tonight goes somewhere different. Tonight is about 10 threads the show has been quietly pulling at for years and years. Things most people have registered without quite knowing what to do with. Frank Grimes and what his one appearance tells you about how Springfield is actually designed to work. The stonecutters and the architecture of protection sitting underneath all those jokes about secret societies. Abraham Simpson and the thing Homer did in season 1 that the show has spent 36 years treating as a background detail. Maud Flanders and the decade-long aftermath of a death nobody was held accountable for. Rod and Todd Flanders and what 3 decades of careful, quiet characterization has actually been documenting. Sideshow Bob, not the villain reading the other one, Lenny and Carl, Itchy and Scratchy, Ralph Wiggum, and Santa's little helper, who has been in almost every episode since the very first night this show was on television, quietly doing the same thing throughout and meaning more by it than anyone usually stops to notice. 10 threads, a fair amount of time. Let's go carefully. If you enjoy this, a subscribe genuinely helps. It's how I know this kind of video is worth making more of. There's an episode of The Simpsons that the show's writers have said made them genuinely uncomfortable to write. It aired on May 4th, 1997. It's called Homer's Enemy. It is, on IMDb, the highest rated episode in the show's entire history. A 9.3 out of 10 from nearly 50,000 ratings. And the reason it sits at that score, the reason it's the episode people keep coming back to more than almost any other, is that it's the only episode in which the show tells you the full truth about what Springfield is and who Homer Simpson actually is within it. The episode introduces Frank Grimes, not a recurring character, not someone who is going to become part of the furniture, a one-time character who was introduced, used, and destroyed within 22 minutes, and who left a mark on the show's mythology that never quite healed. Here's his biography as the episode gives it to you, abandoned by his parents at age 4, on his own at 18, worked his way through life with no support, no connections, no advantages. Studied at night school, survived an explosion at a silo, earned his college degree through continuous grinding effort, built a career in nuclear safety through genuine competence and genuine hard work, arrived at the Springfield nuclear power plant as a man who had earned everything he had, and then he met Homer Simpson, Now, Homer's biography across the show's run is, and I mean this with genuine affection, completely insane. He has caused several near meltdowns at the plant where he is somehow still employed. He once went to space. He won a Grammy briefly. He owned a factory. He had dinner with Gerald Ford. He met several American presidents. He became a food critic, a bowling champion, a rock band manager, a missionary, and a moderately successful barbershop singer. He has been shot, fallen off cliffs, been hit by cars, survived explosions, and walked away from virtually every one of them without lasting consequence. He has an IQ that the show occasionally implies is somewhere in the range that would qualify him for various protective classifications. And he has never, not once, across nearly 800 episodes, faced meaningful professional consequences for any of it. Frank Grimes looks at this. He looks at Homer's house, his car, his wife, his children, his continued employment, his trophy from a children's science fair he apparently won as an adult. He looks at all of it. And he cannot process it. And here's the thing. Grimes is not wrong. That is the thing the show is asking you to notice. Grimes is not a bitter man who has warped his perception through resentment. He is a rational man who has arrived at an accurate assessment of his environment, and his environment cannot survive that assessment. The episode plays the tension for comedy. Homer is oblivious, as Homer is oblivious to most things. The other characters are baffled by Grimes's agitation. Even Bart and Lisa seem confused by someone taking Homer's incompetence personally. Because in Springfield, Homer's incompetence is not personal, it's just the weather. Nobody questions it because nobody has ever thought to question it. Grimes is the first person in the show's history to actually look at Homer Simpson directly and say, out loud in front of witnesses, that none of this makes sense. And Springfield destroys him for it. Not out of cruelty, not through any deliberate act. The show is precise about this. Grimes isn't destroyed by a villain or a conspiracy. He's destroyed by the simple fact that a world built on a certain kind of immunity cannot tolerate someone who insists on pointing at the immunity. He goes mad. He begins mimicking Homer, acting without a care in the world, as he says, and electrocutes himself on an exposed wire. And at his funeral, Homer falls asleep and starts muttering, and the congregation laughs. They laugh. A man has just died. A man who worked his entire life for everything he had and received no protection from a system that casually lavished it on someone who never earned any of it. And the room laughs and the show ends. Here's the detail that sits with me. The writers have said in interviews and commentaries that Homer's enemy made them uncomfortable. They said it several times across different promotional materials. They brought Frank Grimes back once in a brief gag as a ghost. They created a son for him in a later season and killed the son within the same episode. They never gave Grimes a real legacy, never let his observation land with consequences, never had anyone in Springfield say, after his death, yes, he had a point. Because the show understood that if Springfield acknowledged Grimes's point, the show's premise collapses. The premise requires Homer's immunity. Without it, Homer isn't a lovable everyman in a quirky town. He's a man whose failures are subsidized by a system that insulates certain people from consequences and leaves others completely exposed. And that's not a comedy. That's something more accurate and less comfortable. What Frank Grimes reveals isn't something about Homer, really. It's something about the world Homer inhabits. Springfield is not a quirky place where odd things happen to an ordinary family. It's a place with a structure, a real structure, with real beneficiaries and real excluded parties. Homer is inside the structure. Frank Grimes was outside it. And the structure held. The 9.3 rating. 40-something thousand people giving that number to that episode. I think they gave it that rating not because it's the funniest episode, or the most inventive, or the most technically accomplished. I think they gave it that number because it's the one episode of The Simpsons that makes you feel in your chest something the show usually lets you avoid feeling. The sense that the joke is on someone and the someone is not Homer Simpson. Grimes saw Springfield clearly. It cost him everything, and nobody who watches that episode, really watches it, comes away entirely comfortable with the laugh track. But let me go a little further with this because there's a specific piece of the episode that I think gets underweighted in most discussions of it. The science fair trophy. Early in the episode, Homer has a children's science fair trophy in his office. It is a trophy he won as a grown adult by entering a competition intended for children. He beat the children. He has this trophy on his desk at the nuclear power plant where he works, and nobody, not Burns, not Lenny, not Carl, nobody has ever commented on it. It's simply part of the office furniture. Grimes notices it. And his reaction is the reaction of a rational person. Complete bewilderment, followed by escalating distress. Because what the trophy represents is not just Homer's incompetence, it represents the absence of any corrective mechanism. Somewhere, a child lost a science fair to Homer Simpson, and the people organizing the fair permitted this, and Homer received a trophy, and that trophy migrated to his workplace, and there it sits. Every institution that should have caught this, the fair's organizers, HR at the plant, the basic social awareness of Homer's colleagues, failed to register it as unusual. The system shrugged. And this is the thing about Frank Grimes that the episode asks you to feel alongside him. His distress isn't disproportionate. It would be disproportionate if this were an isolated incident. But the science fair trophy isn't an isolated incident. It's a symbol of a pattern. The pattern says, the rules apply to some people and not to others, and the distribution of this immunity has nothing to do with merit or effort or competence. And nobody in Springfield talks about this openly because the pattern is the water they all swim in. Now consider Burns' response to Grimes. Burns briefly in the episode becomes interested in Grimes. He recognizes his competence, invites him to his mansion for dinner, promotes him in passing. Then Homer does something absurd, Burns laughs, and Burns returns to Homer. Burns, the single most powerful figure in Springfield, encounters a genuinely competent person and finds him temporarily interesting, then reverts to his preference for the person who is the most entertainingly incompetent. This is not presented as a mystery. Burns simply prefers Homer. Homer amuses him. Grimes challenges the equilibrium. Equilibrium is preferable. There's a meritocracy argument buried in Homer's enemy that the show never quite makes explicit, but which the structure of the episode forces you to confront. The show's premise, that Homer, a man of low competence and lower self-awareness, has managed to live a full and materially comfortable life, requires a world where competence is not the primary determinant of outcome. Frank Grimes arrived believing the opposite. He believed genuinely and reasonably, based on his own experience, that effort and competence were the primary determinants of what you got. And Springfield dismantled that belief systematically, episode by episode, within 22 minutes. The thing the writer said made them uncomfortable was, I think, this. They built a comedy around a man whose life trajectory implicitly requires the rules not to apply. And then they introduced a character who believed the rules applied. And they couldn't make the character wrong without destroying the comedy's premise. And they couldn't let the character be right without destroying Homer's likability. So they destroyed the character instead and moved on. And Homer slept through the funeral, and the congregation laughed, and the credits rolled. The highest rated episode in the show's history. Not because it's the funniest, because it's the truest. And the truth in it is one of those truths that, once you've properly registered it, you can't quite unregister. Every subsequent episode of Homer getting away with something sits a little differently. Not worse, exactly, just differently. Now, there's one more element of this I want to examine before we move on, which is the specific scene between Grimes and Burns, because it's doing something the rest of the episode doesn't quite do. When Burns first encounters Grimes, he briefly becomes interested in him. Burns, who has very low tolerance for incompetence in principle and very high tolerance for Homer's incompetence specifically, finds Grimes's credentials and composure temporarily compelling. He considers promoting him. He invites him to his mansion for a dinner party. And for a brief moment, you get to watch Frank Grimes in the kind of environment his abilities might have earned him. The kind of environment the stonecutters, the plant hierarchy, the Springfield power structure represents. The dinner goes badly because Homer's also there, being Homer. Burns returns his attention to Homer. Grimes is forgotten. What the scene shows is that Grimes's competence was visible. It was recognized briefly by the single most powerful person in Springfield. It wasn't enough, because recognition and sustained reward are different things, and the difference between them is the maintenance cost. Homer requires no maintenance from Burns' perspective. He entertains Burns through his failures. He generates the specific kind of amusement Burns seems to value. and he presents no challenge to Burns' sense of himself. Grimes, by contrast, was a challenge. A man who had earned things is implicitly a reminder that things can be earned, which is a complicated thought for a man who inherited his position and has spent a century maintaining it through institutional control rather than merit. Burns found Grimes interesting for approximately one episode. Homer, Burns has found interesting for the entire run of the show. That preference is not irrational from Burns's perspective. It's a preference for the kind of person who makes no demands on him, presents no implicit comparisons, and provides entertainment without complication. The preference is stable, and it explains a great deal about what Springfield rewards and why. Frank Grimes was a complication. He was the thing Springfield's equilibrium couldn't process. And the equilibrium, as equilibriums do, processed him out instead. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. And since we're talking about who the structure protects, it's worth spending some time with the episode that actually maps that structure in detail. Season 6, Episode 12. January 8th, 1995. Homer the Great. An episode most people remember for one song in particular and tend to process as a fairly straightforward parody of Freemasonry. I don't think it's that. Or rather, I think it starts as that, and then it becomes something more precise. The premise? Homer discovers that Lenny and Carl, his closest friends and work colleagues, are members of a secret society called the Stonecutters. The Stonecutters have existed for centuries. They have ceremonies and rituals and a ranking system and a private club, and they, as the song explains, control the things that actually run the world. They are the ones who hold back the electric car, who make Steve Guttenberg a star, who rigged every Oscar, stitched together the flag, and kept the metric system down. The song lists these things and the episode plays them for laughs, and fair enough, it's a very good song. But let me tell you what the song is actually listing. Every item on that list is a real documented conspiracy theory, or a real credible critique of institutional power that was circulating in public discourse in 1995. The electric car suppression theory was real. The Oscar rigging concern was real. Keeping the metric system out of American life was a genuine policy position sustained by specific lobbying interests. The Stonecutter song takes the format of absurdist comedy and embeds within it an entirely coherent critique of how closed networks sustain their advantages. The show knows this. You don't write those specific examples by accident, and then there's the membership. Burns is a stonecutter. Chief Wiggum is a stonecutter. Kent Brockman, Springfield's primary news anchor, is a stonecutter. The episode shows you explicitly that the people who control Springfield's industry, its law enforcement, and its media are all members of the same private institution. That is not a parody of power. That is a diagram of power. Homer's number is 908. Below number 1, who is Burns, but above almost everyone else. And here's where the episode becomes interesting in ways the comedy skates over. Homer doesn't earn his number. He inherits a position in the hierarchy through a birthmark that fulfills an ancient prophecy, the chosen one. He is placed at the top of a centuries-old institution with no qualifications whatsoever. And the institution's response, once he proves inconvenient at the top, is elegant in its institutional ruthlessness. They dissolve the Stonecutters and reconstitute themselves as the ancient mystic society of no Homers. One Homer allowed per the prophecy, technically compliant. Fundamentally the same club with Homer removed. Think about that for a second. The Stonecutters are given absolute power by a prophecy. The prophecy is fulfilled. The power should transfer. And instead, the institution rewrites its own rules to absorb the prophecy's letter while preserving its existing hierarchy. This is not a parody of how institutions respond to challenges. This is a documentary of it at 22 minutes. What the Stonecutters episode gives you, if you sit with it, is the mechanism by which Frank Grimes' world works. It shows you who the immunity belongs to and why. Burns has it because he is number 1 in a network that controls the levers of Springfield. Kent Brockman has it because the network controls his media access. Chief Wiggum has it because the network is his professional peer group. Homer has it, And this is the part that the show never quite addresses directly but clearly implies. Not just because of the stonecutters, but because the plant connects him to Burns, and Burns is number one. And that proximity has been operating as a shield this entire time. Frank Grimes had none of that. No network, no number, no connection to anyone in the hierarchy. He arrived in Springfield as an outsider with competence and nothing else, in a system that rewards connection and penalizes the absence of it. His merits were real. They were simply irrelevant to the mechanism by which Springfield distributes its protection. The episode ends, as I said, with Homer dissolving the Stonecutter's power. Springfield returns to normal. The society reconstitutes. The status quo reasserts itself within essentially a single scene. The show is being quite honest about something here. Giving a reformer symbolic authority and letting them feel the brief flush of it is a very old institutional technique. You bring the challenger inside the tent, give them a title, watch them discover that symbolic authority isn't the same as structural authority, and wait for the status quo to re-emerge. It almost always does. Homer doesn't understand any of this. He genuinely believes he changed something. He didn't. The club is called something different now, the membership is identical, the levers are the same, and Homer will continue to be protected by his proximity to number one for as long as he works at the plant, completely unaware of the infrastructure that explains his survival. Let me go a bit deeper on the membership list because it's instructive. The episode doesn't show every stonecutter, but it shows enough. Burns as number one. Kent Brockman, Springfield's dominant media voice. Chief Wiggum, who controls policing and therefore controls what crimes are investigated and which ones quietly aren't. Lenny and Carl, Homer's immediate social circle. Principal Skinner, who controls the educational system Springfield's children move through. Sideshow Mel, who has media adjacency through Krusty's show. Dr. Hibbert, Springfield's primary physician. This is the triangle you need to understand Springfield's power structure. Industry, Burns, law enforcement, Wiggum, media, Brockman. Every other institution in the town flows through one of those three channels, and all three channel operators are in the same private club. Not metaphorically, actually. They meet in the same building, follow the same rituals, share the same social networks, and operate with the mutual awareness of what each other's interests are. What this means practically is that Burns can dump pollution in the river, and Wiggum doesn't investigate, and Brockman reports it as a non-story. What it means practically is that when Homer causes a near meltdown at the plant, the medical, legal, and media response all flow through institutions whose operators have social relationships with his employer. The same club, the same number system, the same private interest in maintaining the equilibrium. I keep thinking about the Stonecutters' history as the episode obliquely presents it. They've existed for centuries. They've survived the transition from whatever precursor organizations they descended from into a contemporary private club in a mid-sized American city. That kind of institutional survival requires adaptation, rebranding when necessary, admitting new members who acquire the relevant institutional power, shedding ones who don't. The Stonecutters didn't get to the present day by being rigid. They got there by being responsive to shifts in the power landscape while maintaining the core function. Keeping the right people's interests quietly aligned. Homer the Great was a comedy episode that aired in 1995. But the specific model it's describing, closed professional networks that informally coordinate the exercise of institutional power, was not a fictional invention in 1995 and is not a fictional invention now. The Stonecutters are a cartoon. The pattern they illustrate is not. And the episode's punchline, that Homer, placed at the head of the institution, immediately uses its resources for good, dismantles its secrecy, and turns it into a charitable organization, at which point everyone leaves and reconstitutes the club without him, is not just a joke about Homer's character. It's a precise observation about what happens when someone without the relevant institutional instincts gets symbolic control of a network built on those instincts. The network doesn't change. It waits him out, and when he's sufficiently neutralized, it continues. But let me linger on what Homer actually does with the power, briefly, because it's interesting. When Homer becomes the chosen one and leads the Stonecutters, his first instinct is benevolence. He uses the club's considerable resources and social connections for good works. Charitable projects, community service, the kinds of things the Stonecutters' power could theoretically be used for. And it's miserable. The members hate it. The Stonecutters were not designed to make Springfield better. They were designed to make their members' lives more comfortable and their interests better protected. Benevolence is not only not the point, it's actively antithetical to the organizational culture. Homer's leadership is not just ineffective, it's experienced as an attack on everything the institution exists to do. This is a very specific satire, and it's aimed quite precisely. The argument isn't that powerful institutions are incapable of doing good. It's that powerful institutions whose primary purpose is the protection of their members' interests will treat attempts to redirect that power toward the general good as a form of internal sabotage. The members didn't join the Stonecutters to help Springfield. They joined to help themselves and each other. An organization led by someone who doesn't understand this distinction, or who understands it and doesn't care, is an organization that will be administratively undone by its own membership until a leader who does understand it is installed. The ancient mystic society of no Homers is therefore not a workaround. It's a correction. The institution correcting itself back toward its actual purpose after a brief aberration. And the correction is so quick, so complete, and so structurally elegant that you barely have time to notice that the coup was institutional rather than personal. Nobody voted Homer out. Nobody confronted him. The club simply reconstituted without him and continued as before. That is exactly how institutional power responds to disruption from within, when the disruption is led by someone who lacks the social awareness to understand what they're disrupting. It's not dramatic, it's administrative. And it works every time. Now, the Frank Grimes connection. I want to bring it back here because I think the Stonecutters episode and Homer's enemy are in direct conversation with each other, even though they aired a year and a half apart and neither explicitly references the other. Grimes arrived in Springfield as someone outside the Stonecutters network. Not in it, not adjacent to it. Nobody in the club had a reason to protect him or smooth over his difficulties or absorb his observations harmlessly. And the contrast with Homer is total. Homer, who is number 908 in an institution that includes Burns, Brockman, and Wiggum, is insulated from consequences at every institutional level in Springfield. Grimes, who is number nobody in nothing, encounters every consequence at full force. The two episodes together make an argument that neither makes alone. Homer's enemy says some people are immune to consequences and others are not. The Stonecutter says, here is the mechanism by which that immunity is assigned and maintained. Read together, they're the show's most complete statement about how the world inside the cartoon actually works, why certain things happen to certain people, why effort and merit and competence are insufficient in isolation, why the thing that saves you, or fails to, is rarely anything you did and almost always something you belong to. That's not a cartoon about secret societies. That's the show in 1995, making an argument about power with enough jokes in it that you can watch it twice without feeling the argument land. The third time, though, the third time you feel it. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Abraham Simpson tells stories. This is the defining thing about him. The thing every other character on the show mentions. The thing his own family finds most exhausting about his presence. Long, circular, frequently implausible stories about the war and his youth and people and places that no one else in the room has any connection to. He tells them to anyone within range at any opportunity, with no visible awareness of whether anyone is listening. This has been true since he first appeared on the show in season 1, And there is a building in Springfield, the Springfield Retirement Castle, where Abe Simpson has lived for most of the show's run. Homer committed his living father to that building in Season 1, Episode 4. The Simpsons had been on the air for 6 weeks, and the fact of it, the simple, unexamined fact that Homer put his father in a building across town and mostly got on with his life, has been sitting in the show's background ever since, accumulating weight for every episode that followed. I want to be careful here because the relationship between Homer and Abraham Simpson is one of the show's most sustained and genuinely complicated threads, and it's easy to flatten it into a simple verdict: Homer's a bad son. That misses what the show is actually documenting. It's more specific than that, and more sad. Here's what we know about Abe Simpson, assembled across the show's history. He served in World War II. He raised Homer largely on his own after Homer's mother, Mona, left the family, which we'll come to in a moment. He was not, by most accounts of the show, an emotionally available father. He told Homer he was a disappointment. He struggled to express love in ways Homer could receive. He gave Homer a legacy of suppressed feeling and unexpressed expectation that Homer has spent the entire run of the series unconsciously reproducing with his own children. And Homer, when he became an adult with a family and a house on Evergreen Terrace, put Abe in the retirement castle. Not a nice one. The retirement castle is shown across multiple episodes to be a place of leaky roofs, inadequate staffing, indifferent care, and deep, pervasive loneliness. The residents sit in rows and watch television and wait. Abe tells his stories, those endless, rambling stories about his past, to anyone who will half listen, and usually nobody is listening properly. And here's the episode that recontextualizes everything. Season 7, Episode 8, Mother Simpson. It aired November 19th, 1995. In that episode, Homer discovers that Mona Simpson, his mother, who he believed dead, is actually alive and has been living underground for decades, wanted by the government for her involvement in a protest that destroyed one of Burns's biological weapons labs in the 1960s. Mona is voiced by Glenn Close. And the episode, when it reaches its emotional center, gives you a piece of information that changes the shape of everything that came before it. Mona left. She left because she had to, because staying meant prison, but she left. And she left Abe alone with a small child with no warning and no official goodbye, and he raised that child as best he could. The Abe who couldn't tell Homer he loved him, the Abe who called Homer a disappointment, the Abe whose emotional unavailability is the emotional inheritance Homer has been managing his whole life. That Abe was a man who was abandoned by his wife and left to raise a son alone, with no support and no model for how to do it, in a time when men of his generation were given essentially no language for emotional expression. The cycle is completely legible once you have all the pieces. Mona couldn't be present for Homer. Abe didn't know how to be present for Homer. Homer doesn't know how to be present for Abe. 3 generations of people who cared about each other and couldn't find the translation. And Homer's response, not consciously, not maliciously, was to put the problem in a building across town and mostly not think about it. Season 6, Episode 11, Fear of Flying. Abe tells Homer directly that he failed him as a father. The episode is played for comedy. The content is devastating. Homer's response is a kind of bewildered deflection that reads honestly as someone who was never given the tools to have this conversation. He's not refusing to engage. He literally doesn't have the vocabulary for what Abe is trying to say to him. Because nobody gave it to him. Because nobody gave it to Abe either. And Abe keeps trying. That's the part that stays with me. He makes phone calls. He shows up at family events. He tells his stories, those long, circular, often fictional stories, to anyone within range. He is, in the most visible and persistent way possible, trying to be noticed, trying to be heard. The stories are his way of saying, I have a history. I existed. Someone, please, acknowledge that I was here. Homer mostly doesn't. Not because he doesn't love his father, but because the muscle you use for that kind of acknowledgement was never developed in either of them. and it is very hard to develop a muscle in your 50s that you never built in your childhood. The show doesn't give you a resolution. There's no episode where Homer sits in the retirement castle and really listens, where the conversation finally happens and the weight of it is properly felt. The relationship bumbles forward, occasionally warm, frequently oblivious, always carrying a gap that neither man has the tools to close. And the castle sits there, across the road from where these lives are happening. Full of people the world has finished with, waiting for visits that come less often than they should. The Simpsons is not a show about bad people. That's important to say. Homer is not a bad person. He is a person who was shaped by specific absences and who reproduced them, not out of cruelty, but out of a kind of helplessness that the show depicts with more accuracy than it usually gets credit for. What it documented over the course of its run in the background of hundreds of episodes is what it looks like when love gets passed down the generations incomplete, when the language for it is missing, when the best you can do is put someone in a building and hope that constitutes care. It doesn't. But it's often the best people can manage, and the show knew that, and it was honest about it, and that honesty is the thing that gets harder to sit with every time you go back. But let me add one more layer, because there's a piece of this that doesn't get talked about enough. Abe's stories. Abe tells stories. This is his defining characteristic, the one every other character comments on, the one the show returns to across hundreds of episodes. Long, rambling, often internally inconsistent stories about the war, about his youth, about people and places and times that no one in his present life shares any connection to. The other characters listen impatiently or don't listen at all or leave mid-story. Homer particularly tends to tune out within the first 30 seconds. But what are the stories actually about? When you pay attention to them, really pay attention across multiple episodes. They're about a time when Abe Simpson was significant, when he was a soldier, a husband, a young man in a world that seemed to be asking things of him and responding to his answers. A time before the institutional warehousing, a time before the invisibility. The stories are Abe trying to establish to anyone who will listen that he existed and that his existence had weight. The fact that the stories are often factually dubious, sometimes contradictory, occasionally fantastical, this is part of the character's comedy, and it works as comedy. But it's also psychologically accurate. Elderly people who are isolated, who feel their history being forgotten, who are surrounded by people who don't share their reference points and don't particularly want to. They sometimes embellish, they sometimes reconstruct. The past becomes more vivid and more heroic because the present is so relentlessly small. The stories grow to fill the gap that the present leaves. Homer doesn't understand this. He's not equipped to. He grew up with a father who couldn't tell him what he was feeling, and he became a man who can't hear what his father's trying to say. The language was missing when it should have been built, and it's still missing now, and both of them are too old and too settled in their patterns to build it from scratch. There's a recurring scene type in The Simpsons that I think of as the phone call scene. Abe calls. Homer answers. Within a few exchanges, Homer's trying to end the call. Abe is trying to extend it. Homer says goodbye and hangs up, and there's a beat, sometimes a cut to Abe sitting with the receiver, sometimes just the implication of it. And then the episode continues. Those phone call scenes are, if you watch them with the weight of the relationship in mind, genuinely difficult. Not the individual moments, each one plays as comedy. But the accumulated pattern of them across 15 or 20 years of episodes is something else. A record of a son who doesn't know how to stay on the phone long enough, and a father who doesn't know how to make staying worth it. Neither of them doing anything wrong exactly, both of them doing something that costs the other person something. And the castle sits there, across town, full of people in exactly the same situation, told by the architecture of the place that they have reached the end of the story where anyone needs to know what comes next. Let me add one more dimension to this, which is the Homer as father layer, because the cycle is more visible once you place Homer's relationship with his own children next to his relationship with Abe. Homer loves Bart, this is not in question. Across the full run of the show, the writers have demonstrated in numerous episodes that Homer's love for his son is real and runs deep. But Homer's expression of that love is erratic, frequently absent, sometimes counterproductive. He is not emotionally available in a consistent way. He is sometimes present in the ways that matter and frequently absent in the ways that matter more. He praises Bart when Bart achieves things he can point to and largely overlooks Bart's actual inner life, which the show occasionally gives us glimpses of and which is more complicated and more vulnerable than Bart's performance suggests. This is precisely the pattern the show attributes to Abe's parenting of Homer. The love was real. The expression was inadequate. The tools weren't there. Homer didn't build those tools in his childhood and didn't know he needed to build them as an adult. And so the gap between what he feels and what he can usefully communicate to his children is, in some ways, structurally similar to the gap between what Abe felt and what he could communicate to Homer. The difference, and the show is quite careful about this difference, is that Homer's household has Marge. And Marge, whatever the show does to her characterization in later seasons, is in the early seasons a person of genuine emotional intelligence, who fills the gap between Homer's feelings and his children's needs. She is the translator. She is the person who, when Homer has failed to communicate something important, finds a way to communicate it through her presence. The Simpson household is not the Abe Simpson household because it has Marge in it. The cycle is not perfectly reproduced because there is a corrective mechanism Homer didn't have. But Abe didn't have a Marge. Abe had himself and a child, in the absence of the person who might have been the translator, and he managed as best he could with what he had. And what he had wasn't enough, and the result was a son who loved him and couldn't find the words, and a father who loved him and couldn't find the words, and decades of phone calls that ended too soon. The Mother Simpson episode, Mona's Return, does something that I don't think gets discussed enough in the context of this relationship. When Homer realizes his mother is alive, his response is not straightforwardly joyful. It's complicated by everything he's carried about her absence. The gap she left, the way that gap shaped him, the specific kind of unloved by mother experience that has different contours from being unloved by a father. The episode is remarkable because it lets Homer's grief and his love exist simultaneously without resolving either. He didn't stop loving her when she left. He loved her across her absence, and the love doesn't erase the damage the absence did, and the damage doesn't erase the love. Both are present, both are real. And then she leaves again at the end of the episode. She has to. The government is still looking for her. She goes. Homer watches her bus disappear. He smiles. The show ends. That's what the show did with those characters. And it's extraordinary when you sit with it. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. There is a specific sequence of events in season 11 that, if you describe them plainly without the comedy framing, reads quite differently from the way the episode presents them. Homer is at a racing event. He positions himself in front of a row of cheerleaders who are about to fire promotional t-shirts into the crowd using pneumatic cannons. He ducks at the critical moment to pick up a peanut from the ground. The cannons fire. The t-shirts travel over Homer's head and hit Maud Flanders, who is standing in the row above him. The impact knocks her off the stadium bleachers. She dies. Homer caused it. Not with malice, not with intent, but causally, mechanically, in the most literal sense. He moved out of the trajectory because he wanted something, and the thing that should have hit him hit Ned's wife instead. The episode was called Alone Again, Natra Diddly. It aired February 13th, 2000, Valentine's Day weekend. And nobody held Homer accountable. Not the narrative, not Springfield's legal system, not Ned, not anyone. The behind-the-scenes circumstances are well documented. Voice actress Maggie Roswell had been playing Maud since the very first season. A dispute over compensation for a recording session she had to conduct remotely wasn't resolved, and she left. The production decision to kill Maud was contractual, but the method the writers chose, and they chose it, was pointed in ways the episode's comedy framing almost obscures. Ned forgave him. Of course Ned forgave him. Ned forgives Homer for everything. It is the central dynamic of their relationship. Homer causes harm through obliviousness, and Ned, whose theology requires forgiveness, extends it unfailingly. And this is played across the show's run as a kind of joke about Ned's excessive niceness. But watch what Ned's forgiveness actually does to Ned over the decade following Maud's death, and it stops looking like a joke. In the seasons after Maud dies, Ned dates a series of women. A gym teacher, introduced and resolved within an episode, an internet relationship, a country singer, a woman from a dating service. Each one arrives with potential and departs without lasting consequence. The show plays these as comedy, as Ned's difficulty adjusting to single life, as fish-out-of-water plots about a religious widower navigating modern dating. And they are that, but they're also something else. What Ned is doing in each of these relationships is searching for a replacement for the architecture his life was built around. Maud wasn't just his wife, she was the reason Ned's particular version of devotion had a home. He is a man constitutionally organized around the idea of devoted partnership, and the partner is gone, and the devotion has nowhere to go except outward toward increasingly unsuitable recipients. His religiosity intensifies after her death. The prayers become more frequent, the references to God's plan more insistent, the theological framework more load-bearing, because if Maud's death was God's plan, then it wasn't random. And if it wasn't random, then it has meaning. And if it has meaning, then Ned can survive it. The alternative, that Maud died because Homer wanted a free t-shirt and ducked at the wrong moment, and there is no plan and no meaning, and it was just bad luck mediated by one man's appetite for promotional merchandise, is not survivable for Ned. So the plan has to be real. God has to have intended it. The theology becomes a survival mechanism. And here's the episode that retroactively frames all of this. Season 8, Episode 8, Hurricane Nettie. It aired December 29th, 1996, 4 years before Maud's death, but it's the episode that explains Ned Flanders completely. In it, Ned's house is destroyed by a hurricane while every other house on the street survives. He has a breakdown, he ends up in a mental hospital, and through therapy, his backstory is revealed. Ned's parents were permissive bohemians. They gave him no structure, no rules, no consistent framework. As a child psychologist in the episode explains, Ned spent years in therapy learning to manage the rage and chaos that came from a completely unstructured childhood. He overcorrected, maximally, into what we see now. Perfect politeness, perfect restraint, perfect adherence to structure and rule and routine. The rigid goodness isn't his natural state. It's a defense mechanism, a very effective one, until something hits it hard enough. And Maud's death hit it hard enough. And the defense mechanism held, or appeared to hold. But what Ned did with the internal damage was redirect it into everything within reach. Increased control over Rod and Todd. Increased theological load on his grief. Increased effort toward replacement relationships that couldn't bear the weight being placed on them. Homer caused the death. Homer received no consequences. And Ned, who is, by almost any reasonable measure, a much better person than Homer on most dimensions the show has defined those terms, spent years absorbing the damage privately in a framework that required him to describe it as God's will. There was something very specific and very uncomfortable about that, and the show knew it. It depicts it consistently across multiple seasons with a kind of quiet precision. Not loud about it, not flagging it, just showing you in episode after episode what Ned Flanders looks like when he's carrying more than he's allowed to put down. He eventually finds a degree of peace. He marries Edna Krabappel in season 23, played with genuine warmth by the show. And when Marcia Wallace, who voiced Edna, died in 2013, the show retired the character with unusual care. 2 episodes of grief, a real ending, more considered than most. As if, having written one widow badly, the show wanted to write the other one honestly. But there's something else I want to linger on here, which is the specific dynamic between Ned and Homer in the years after Maude's death, because it is one of the show's quietly strangest recurring arrangements, and it becomes stranger the more you think about it. Homer is the person Ned relies on most. Across the seasons following Maude's death, it's Homer who is present at Ned's lowest moments, Homer who helps him move forward, however clumsily. Homer who is physically adjacent to Ned's grief in ways that most of Ned's ostensibly more appropriate support networks are not. The church community appears occasionally, Rod and Todd are always there, but Homer keeps being the person who shows up, not always helpfully, often comically, and in the critical moments. And Ned keeps letting him, keeps forgiving him, keeps choosing to interpret Homer's oblivious blundering as essentially benign even when it clearly isn't, even when its consequences have been catastrophic. The psychological literature on forgiveness is quite interesting on the question of what forgiveness actually does to the person who extends it. The argument that forgiveness primarily benefits the forgiver, that it releases the psychological burden of sustained resentment, is well established. But it's also been argued that unconditional, reflexive forgiveness, the kind that doesn't require accountability or change from the forgiven party, can function as a way of maintaining a particular relationship at the cost of the forgiver's accurate assessment of their situation. If you forgive everything, you never have to confront what you've lost or who caused you to lose it. Ned's theology requires him to forgive, not as a choice he makes fresh each time, but as a structural feature of his framework. Homer killed his wife, causally through selfishness, without meaning to, and Ned's theology asks him to forgive that, and he does. And in doing so, he maintains a relationship with the person most causally connected to his loss, and that relationship becomes the primary relationship of his adult life. The show never frames this as strange. It's played as the central comedic dynamic of the show. The pushy neighbor and the exasperated one, decades of mutual irritation and surprising warmth. But if you hold the Maude backstory in your mind while watching any Homer-Ned scene from season 12 onward, the dynamic shifts slightly, not dramatically, just enough. Let me also say something about the specific replacement women, because the pattern of them is worth examining in detail. Each woman Ned dates after Maude is introduced with a quality that echoes something from Maude's character. Devout, or nurturing, or domestically organized, or community-minded. The show is not random about this. The replacement candidates are shaped toward the Maude template, which tells you that on some level the show understands what Ned is doing. He is not looking for someone new. He is looking for someone familiar. He is trying to reconstruct the architecture of his previous life by finding someone who fits the space Maude occupied. And each time something goes wrong. The gym teacher is too athletic in ways that create practical problems. The internet relationship has barriers the real world can't paper over. The country singer has a life and trajectory that doesn't fit the Springfield domestic model. Each candidate fails not because she is inadequate, but because she is not Maude. And the space Ned is trying to fill is Maude-shaped in specific ways that no other person can be shaped the same way. The Edna relationship, when it eventually works precisely because Edna is emphatically not Maude-shaped. She is chaotic where Maude was orderly. She is world-weary where Maude was earnest. She challenges Ned's framework rather than fitting into it. And the show suggests with genuine warmth that this challenge and this thing that doesn't fit the template is exactly what Ned needed. Not a reconstruction, an encounter with something genuinely different, which required him to be someone genuinely different in response. The relationship worked because it asked Ned to grow rather than recover. That's a meaningful distinction, and the show makes it clearly. Homer causing the death isn't played as Homer's burden to carry. It's played as part of the neighborhood furniture. And that's the show being honest about something. That the people who do harm through inattention and selfishness rarely carry the weight of that harm. The people who absorb it do. The harm flows downward toward the person with the lower capacity to refuse it. And Ned's theology doesn't give him the capacity to refuse it, so he carries it in his rigid goodness and his replacement women and his intensified instruction of the boys, and he tells himself it's God's plan, and in a way, for him, that has to be enough. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Rod and Todd Flanders are, in the conventional reading of The Simpsons, a recurring background gag. The unnervingly devout children of the unnervingly devout neighbor. They appear in the frame, say something that's an exaggerated version of religious naivety, and the scene moves on. That's the surface layer, and if you watch a handful of episodes casually, that's what they look like. But if you actually track Rod and Todd across the show's full run, not just the jokes, but the details, the specific fears they express, the ways they respond to normal stimuli, the things they clearly want and can't have, a different picture assembles. The show has been building a quite precise portrait of childhood in a high-control environment, and it has been doing it quietly, in the margins of hundreds of episodes for 3 decades. Let me tell you what the show has established specifically about Rod and Todd Flanders. They are afraid of Halloween, not in the vague way children are sometimes uneasy about scary things. They experience active distress at the annual event. The show depicts this repeatedly. It's not played as funny exactly, more as a consistent character note that lands somewhere between comedy and something more uncomfortable when you pay attention. They are unfamiliar with standard childhood entertainment, television, video games, secular music. These things are treated in the Flanders household as a combination of confusing and potentially dangerous. The boys encounter them occasionally when visiting the Simpson house and respond with a mixture of fascination and anxiety that is quite specifically the response of children who have been told that something is bad and exciting in equal measure. They are drawn to these things and frightened of them at the same time. That particular flavor of complicated attraction is not something you arrive at naturally, it's something you're taught. Normal peer interaction is consistently difficult for them. Not because they're unkind, both boys are depicted as genuinely gentle, but because the social framework they've been given doesn't map onto the world their peers inhabit. They don't share reference points. They've been raised, in effect, in a slightly separate reality from everyone else on Evergreen Terrace, and it shows in every scene where they try to engage with kids who weren't raised the same way. And then there's the post-Maud period, which we talked about in the last section. After Maud's death, Ned's need for structure intensifies. His religious instruction of the boys becomes more insistent. His vigilance about what they're exposed to increases. The boys, already fearful, become more so. There are nightmare sequences. There are references to anxiety. There are moments where Todd, in particular, says things that read less as a character joke and more as a child reporting accurately on his internal experience of an environment that asks a great deal of him. Now, I want to be careful here, because the point is not that Ned Flanders is a villain. He absolutely is not. He is, by every measure the show offers, a man who loves his children deeply and sincerely and is doing his very best for them. The point is that love and wisdom are not the same thing, and that a person can do everything wrong for entirely right reasons if the framework they're operating from is asking them to. The Hurricane Nettie episode, which I mentioned in the context of Ned himself, establishes the root of this. Ned was raised with no structure, no rules, no framework, no consistent expectations. The psychologist in that episode tells him that the niceness and the restraint and the rigid goodness are a defense against the chaos he grew up in. He built the most structured, rule-governed, expectation-laden childhood he could imagine, because he genuinely believes that's what safety looks like. Because for him, structure was safety. The absence of it nearly destroyed him. But Rod and Todd aren't Ned. They didn't grow up in chaos and find structure redemptive. They grew up in structure and found it, The show suggests carefully and over a long period of time, somewhat frightening. The rules have no external reference. The framework has no outside. The world beyond the fence of the Flanders property is coded as dangerous or at minimum suspect, and the boys have absorbed that coding. What the show seems to be building toward, though it never arrives at it explicitly, is a question about what Rod and Todd become when they leave Ned's house. The show has occasionally shown future versions of Springfield characters, flash forwards, and alternative timelines. It's been notably reticent about showing adult Rod and Todd in any sustained way. And I think there's something in that reticence, a choice not to answer a question the show has been quietly asking for 30 years. Because the pattern the show documents, excessive control in response to the parents' own anxiety, children whose fear responses are heightened by the environment, suppressed curiosity about a world they've been taught to be cautious of. That pattern has well-documented developmental outcomes. The show knows this. The writers know this. The Hurricane Nettie episode from 1996 demonstrates a fairly sophisticated understanding of the relationship between childhood environment and adult psychology. They just never quite say what happens next. They leave Rod and Todd in the Flanders house, perpetually young, perpetually a little frightened, perpetually drawn to the sound of the television through the wall, and unsure whether they're allowed to want to hear it. And perhaps that's right. Perhaps the most honest thing the show can do with them is leave them where they are, not resolved, not rescued, not ruined. Just growing up slowly in a beautiful, spotless house, with a father who would do anything for them, in a world they were taught to be afraid of. There's something about that image that stays. Let me add a piece of this that I find particularly interesting. There's a moment, brief, played almost as a throwaway as Avi in season 8, where Todd Flanders swears, an actual profanity. It's triggered by a particularly frustrating moment during a mini golf game, and it's entirely out of character for everything Todd is supposed to be, and it clearly shocks everyone present, including Ned. The scene is played for comedy, and then the episode moves on. But I think about that moment a fair amount, because what it demonstrates is that the suppression is not complete. Something is in there. Some response to frustration, some vocabulary of emotional expression that hasn't been managed out of existence, just pushed below the surface. The profanity comes out not because Todd is bad, but because the pressure of perfect goodness got heavy enough in one specific moment that something slipped through. That's the Todd who exists underneath the performance of Todd, the boy who, under sufficient pressure, says what he actually feels. And the show only shows him once, briefly, then covers him back up with a comedy. But he was there. The Hurricane Nettie episode does something similar for the whole family, really. When Ned finally breaks, when the hurricane destroys his house, and the poorly rebuilt replacement is the final straw. What comes out isn't demonic or frightening. It's honest. It's a man who has been performing equanimity his entire adult life suddenly, under extreme stress, not performing it. The performance fails, and what's underneath is not a monster, it's just a person, finally saying what he actually feels. And Springfield is so unused to this from Ned that they don't know what to do with it. He ends up hospitalized. His honesty is treated as a crisis. The parallel to Rod and Todd is implicit but real. Two children raised in the tradition of the performance, two children for whom the gap between what is felt and what is expressed is, by design, very large. The golf swearing moment is Todd getting a small piece of the truth out. The Hurricane Nettie arc is where Ned's childhood programming eventually led under enough pressure. What the show is documenting in the background across decades is not a verdict on Ned or on his theology. It's an observation about the long-term cost of a very specific parenting strategy. The cost isn't always visible. Sometimes it's invisible for a very long time. But the show, which has the patience of a very long run, has watched long enough to see where certain things go. The Flanders house is clean and loving and structurally sound and full of appropriate books and correct meals at appropriate times. It is, by almost every external measure, an admirable household. and 2 boys are growing up inside it, drawing closer to adulthood, with a complicated relationship to a world they've been taught requires their constant vigilance. What they'll do with that when they leave, the show doesn't say. And the silence on that question is, I think, one of its more honest acknowledgments that some things don't resolve neatly within the running time of a television episode. I want to mention one more episode before we move on, because it's one of the show's stranger experiments and it's completely on point for this discussion. Season 8, Episode 12, Heck House. In this episode, Ned volunteers to help scare Bart and his friends away from Halloween mischief. His initial attempts, costumed role-playing, gentle moral scenarios, are laughed off. And then Ned, in what the show presents as a genuine supernatural event, prays for the power to do the job properly and transforms into the devil. He takes the children on a vision of hell. He is, for one episode, a genuinely frightening figure. The episode is played as horror comedy, as Treehouse of Horror episodes are. But it reveals something about Ned that is interesting outside the horror context. When the gentleness fails, when the measured, controlled, perfectly restrained version of Ned proves inadequate to the task, what Ned reaches for is the most dramatic possible intensification of the very same values. Not a different approach. The same approach turned up to a cosmic volume. He doesn't abandon the framework. He requests that the framework be amplified to terrifying effect. This is, when you think about it, exactly what the Hurricane Nettie episode showed about his adult personality generally. He doesn't switch to different tools when the current tools are insufficient. He finds ways to apply more force through the same tools. It's not flexibility, it's escalation within a fixed framework. And Rod and Todd, who watch their father do all of this, are learning. They're learning what the framework looks like at high volume. They're learning that the response to insufficient control is more control. They're learning that the proper response to the world not behaving according to the framework is to find more powerful ways of applying the framework to the world. These are not necessarily wrong lessons in all contexts, but they're the lessons Ned's household is teaching, and they're quite specific. Now consider Bart. Bart, the child next door, who has grown up with essentially the opposite set of lessons. Very little structure, significant freedom, consequences that arrive but rarely reshape the trajectory. Bart has a completely different relationship with frameworks. He ignores them, subverts them, tests them, treats them as obstacles rather than guides. He has his own problems, but he has the specific freedom of someone who was never asked to be perfect and has spent his whole life in the company of his own genuine impulses. The contrast between the two households, the Simpsons' cheerful chaos and the Flanders' precise order, has always been part of the show's geography. It's also, if you look at the children coming out of each household, a fairly pointed study in what different approaches to childhood formation produce. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Sideshow Bob has appeared in 18 episodes of The Simpsons across its full run. He has attempted to kill Bart Simpson by one count or another more times than any villain in the history of American animated television. He has been imprisoned multiple times, escaped multiple times, and returned to Springfield multiple times to resume a pursuit that has never once succeeded. This is, in the conventional reading, a villain of the week structure extended across decades, a reliable comedic engine, a running gag about an unusually persistent enemy. But there's another reading, and once you have it, the conventional one stops being sufficient. Let me start with Bob's actual biography because it is genuinely worth pausing on. Robert Underdunk Terwilliger Jr. is a concert pianist of real accomplishment. An opera singer, several of his in-episode musical performances are not played as parody, but as genuine demonstrations of his ability. He has multiple advanced degrees. His family, introduced in later seasons, contains a brother who attended Oxford and parents who are distinguished figures in the arts. By every objective biographical measure, Sideshow Bob is a person of extraordinary intellectual and artistic gifts. And he chose at some point to become the silent sidekick of Krusty the Clown. The show never explains this choice satisfactorily. It's mentioned in passing and treated as a given. But actually sit with it. A classically trained musician and opera singer with an advanced education chose to wear large shoes and fall down on a children's television program. Before any of the Bart business happened, before any of the criminal activity, Sideshow Bob was already making a choice that was entirely incongruous with his abilities. Something in him wanted the proximity to a performance, even if the performance wasn't the kind his gifts deserved. Or something in him wanted to hide, and a clown show was an effective place to do it. Then Krusty humiliated him once too often, and Bob framed him for armed robbery, and everything cascaded from there. And the specific thing he chose to dedicate himself to once he was in prison and the cascade had started was the elimination of a 10-year-old boy. Not wealth, not power, not revenge against Krusty, who was actually the source of his humiliation. Bart Simpson, who exposed him. Bart, who got him sent to prison. Bart, who, and this is the part the show makes explicit, sees Bob clearly in a way almost nobody else does. Bob's intelligence is invisible to most of Springfield. His gifts go unrecognized. His refinement is a source of contempt or confusion for the people around him. But Bart, a child who understands performance intuitively, who has his own complicated relationship with the gap between what you're supposed to be and what you actually are, Bart recognizes Bob, really recognizes him. And Bob cannot leave that alone. In Season 5, Episode 2, Cape Fear, one of the all-time great Simpsons episodes, aired October 7th, 1993. Bob infiltrates the witness protection program, locates the Simpsons on the houseboat, and has Bart completely at his mercy. He is seconds away from achieving the goal he has been pursuing across multiple seasons. And then Bart asks him to perform a song from the HMS Pinafore. And Bob performs it, all of it, every last note, while Bart plays for time and the houseboat drifts towards shore. The scene is extraordinarily funny and also, if you watch it with the theory in mind, extraordinarily telling. Bob has Bart, he delays, he performs, he sings, and the boat drifts within reach of the authorities. He could have killed Bart in 30 seconds and been away. He performed a complete operatic number instead. Not because he was tricked exactly, but because Bart gave him an audience for something he does beautifully, and Bob, who almost never gets to do the things he does beautifully in front of someone who's actually paying attention, took the opening. And then there's the episode that makes all of this explicit, Season 27, Episode 4. Tree House of Horror 26. Bob kills Bart. Actually kills him. Fulfills the entire purpose of his existence as a character. And his response to achieving it is immediate, total emptiness. He describes it directly. Having accomplished everything he ever set out to do, he feels nothing. He brings Bart back. He saves the thing he spent decades trying to destroy, because without it, there is nothing. The show is not subtle about this. Bob says it in plain terms. The goal was never the goal. The pursuit was the point, not because Bob is secretly fond of Bart, though there may be something to that as well, but because the pursuit of Bart was the one thing in Bob's life that required the full use of everything he had. His intelligence, his planning, his cultural knowledge, his performance skills, his patience. Killing Bart would end the one context in which Bob got to be fully himself, the one arena where his gifts were the appropriate tools for the task. What Sideshow Bob is in this reading is a person of extraordinary ability who could not find a use for that ability that felt commensurate with it. Krusty's show was too small. Prison was too constraining. Brief periods of legitimate life. The one episode where he runs for mayor, the one where he has a wife and son in a small Italian village, always collapse because the legitimate life doesn't ask enough of him. Only the pursuit of Bart asks enough. Only that specific, endless, impossible project keeps the full machinery running. He steps on those rakes in Cape Fiere. all of them, one after another, in a sequence that goes on far longer than any single gag in the show's history. And the running joke is that he keeps stepping on them even though he can see them coming. But that's the whole thing. He keeps starting the same impossible pursuit even though he knows it ends in failure. Not because he can't see the rake, because the rake and the pain of it and the recovery and the trying again is better than nothing. The emotional core of Sideshow Bob is not villainy. It's waste. The waste of gifts that never found a proper home, compressed into an obsession that justifies their use without ever putting them to anything lasting. 30 years of him. 18 episodes. Not once a real ending. And that's its own kind of devastating when you sit with it. Let me linger on the musical performances because I don't think they get enough attention in discussions of this character. Bob has sung in prison full operatic pieces. The HMS Pinafore sequence in Cape Fear is the most famous, but there are others he performs with evident pleasure. Not bitterly, not as a demonstration of resentment. There's genuine enjoyment in those scenes, a person doing something they're excellent at, being fully present in the doing of it. And the setting is always wrong: prison, a houseboat, an imminent murder attempt. The talent and the context are perpetually mismatched. What the musical performances show you, I think, is who Bob could have been. Not in a sentimental way, not suggesting he'd have been happy as a concert pianist if only things had been different, but showing you that the capacity for something entirely other than destruction exists in this person, is active, is available, and has nowhere appropriate to go. The talent is intact. The path that would have made use of it legitimately was closed, or not taken, or not available in the way Bob needed it to be. And so here it is, deployed in a moment of theatrical delay while the boat drifts toward the authorities. His family, when the show introduces them, is another dimension of this. The Terwilligers are a genuinely distinguished family, accomplished, cultured, legitimately impressive in the ways Bob has always wanted to be impressive. His brother Cecil, voiced by David Hyde Pierce, is a character of his own complicated history with Bob, involving grievances about the crusty audition and a life spent in Bob's shadow. The family background confirms that Bob's gifts are not anomalous. He comes from people who achieve things. He is the one who could not find the appropriate vessel for the achievement. The Italian Village episode, where Bob has built a genuinely quiet and beautiful life, with a wife and son who love him, in a place where his history is unknown, is the most painful of his appearances precisely because it shows the alternative working. It's not a fantasy, it's an actual life, running, and Bob abandons it. He can't stay, because familiarity is a kind of identity, and suffering can become so familiar that it starts to feel like it's telling you who you are. Bob has been the man who wants to kill Bart Simpson for so long that a life without that project doesn't feel like his life. The Italian Village offered him the chance to be someone else. He discovered he wasn't ready to be someone else. That's the reading. And he's not a bad mayor. He closes the nuclear plant, which is a genuinely reasonable policy position given everything we know about the plant. He makes decisions, he governs, and then he's exposed, arrested, returned to prison. The legitimate power lasted 1 episode. The pursuit of Bart has lasted 30 years. This ratio tells you something about where Bob's psychological investment actually sits. The political Bob, the village Bob, the prison opera singer Bob, all of these are versions of someone who had the capacity for a life. The show keeps showing you that capacity and then showing you Bob choosing every time to not use it for anything that lasts. That is the tragedy, not the villainy. The ongoing, deliberate, almost comfortable waste. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Lenny Leonard and Carl Carlson have been appearing together in this show since essentially the beginning. They are Homer's closest friends, his constant companions at the plant and at Moe's, and they are, in the show's universe, by every social and narrative metric, a unit. They are invited together. They are mentioned together. They are assumed by every other character in Springfield to be a matched pair in a way the show doesn't apply to any other two characters who aren't related or married. And across the show's entire run, the show has made more direct references to the nature of that pairing than almost any other unspoken dynamic in television history. And then, consistently opted not to complete the sentence. This is not ignorance. And it is not, at this point, primarily network caution. The question of what Lenny and Carl are to each other is something the show has been approaching and circling and retreating from and approaching again for 3 decades. And the decision not to land has evolved over time from a limitation into a deliberate creative stance. I think it's worth talking about what that stance actually is because I think it's more interesting than either a confirmation or a denial would be. Lenny's diary is mentioned in multiple episodes across different seasons. The show treats it as a running gag. The contents apparently reference Carl extensively. The precise nature of those references is never read aloud, never specified, but the show returns to the gag repeatedly enough that it's clearly being sustained intentionally. You don't write the same bit about a diary across 15 years of television by accident. The diary is a signal. It's the show pointing at something and then putting its hand down without saying what it was pointing at. Season 7, Episode 4, Bart Sells His Soul, contains a scene between Lenny and Carl that is played with a warmth that sits slightly outside the register. The show usually uses for male friendship, not dramatically different, just a degree or two warmer. The kind of thing you might not notice the first time and notice the second time, and then find yourself thinking about the third time. There are scenes, particularly in the middle seasons, where Carl's emotional composure is a direct counterpoint to Lenny's visible investment. Lenny is the one whose feelings are closer to the surface. Carl is the one who deflects. That's a consistent dynamic across their episodes together, and it's a specific one. It's the specific architecture of two people who have been together long enough that one of them has learned to let the other's feelings occupy the space while managing their own more privately. The Hawaii episode, the bowling episode, the various episodes where the camera lingers on them in a 2-shot for slightly longer than the joke requires. The show keeps returning to these compositions, two people together, a shared history implicit in the frame, and keeps not quite saying what the composition means. What changed, I think, between the early seasons and the later ones is not the facts of Lenny and Carl's relationship, but the show's relationship to the facts. In the 1990s, the ambiguity was partly about what a network animated comedy could include. By the 2010s, the show had the cultural space to do whatever it wanted on this question, and it still chose not to resolve it. That choice, made with full freedom, is the interesting one. Here's the argument I'd make for why the ambiguity is the right choice, specifically. If the show had Lenny and Carl come out, and many fans have wanted this for a long time, quite reasonably, it would require a coming out narrative. Drama, a process, an arc of acknowledgement, and social consequence. And Lenny and Carl don't have that arc, not because the writers were cowardly, but because the arc doesn't fit what their relationship actually is. Lenny and Carl have been together in some form for their entire adult lives. They go to the same bar every night, they work the same shift. They have a shared vocabulary built from decades of close proximity. Whether or not there is a romantic dimension to that, and the show implies repeatedly that there is, the relationship itself is not something that needs an origin story or a declaration. It already exists. It has always existed. The people involved have never required it to be named in order for it to be real. There's a kind of relationship that predates the vocabulary people use to describe it. That has always been real without benefit of the labels that arrived later. That just is, has always been, regardless of whether anyone's had the conversation about what to call it. Lenny and Carl in this reading are a portrait of that. Two people who built a whole life in proximity to each other long enough ago and thoroughly enough that the social machinery around definitions and declarations never quite caught them. What the show has documented across all those seasons is not a secret or a mystery. It's a relationship that simply doesn't require the narrative scaffolding we've come to associate with that kind of relationship. It doesn't need a season arc. It doesn't need an announcement. It needed what it's always had: 2 characters, a bar, Thursday nights, and enough time for life to happen. Whether you find that quietly moving or slightly frustrating probably depends on what you were hoping the show would give you. I find it interesting. And on reflection, I think I find it more honest than either alternative would have been. Let me add something about Carl's backstory, because the show does eventually give him one, and it changes the texture of the relationship slightly. Carl Carlson is Icelandic American. His heritage, when the show finally examines it in a season 22 episode, is revealed to be quite substantial. A family history with real weight, a sense of belonging to something larger and older than Springfield. Carl knows who he is, where he comes from, what his people have been. He has an internal ground that doesn't depend on his immediate circumstances for its stability. This, I think, is part of why Carl is the composed one. He's not suppressing anything so much as operating from a kind of rootedness that Lenny, whose family background the show has always been somewhat vaguer about, doesn't quite have in the same way. And Lenny, whose affection is closer to the surface, whose diary references Carl across decades, whose emotional investment in this friendship is the more visible one, Lenny is, in some ways, the person who found in Carl's stability something he needed and didn't find elsewhere. A constant, a reliable presence, someone whose composure was something to lean against. This is, again, not confirmed by the show as the explicit dynamic, but it's consistent with what the show has presented episode by episode for a very long time. 2 people whose complementary qualities, Lenny's expressiveness and Carl's groundedness, fit together in a specific way that years and years of Thursday evenings at Moe's has made into something durable. There's a moment in a season 14 episode where Homer, after a prolonged period of attempting to befriend Burns, realizes that what he was looking for in that relationship was what he already had at the bar. The scene is played as comedy. Homer's predictable cluelessness, his oblivious failure to notice the obvious, but it says something real. The relationships that actually sustain people are often the ones they don't assess, don't examine, don't romanticize. They just keep showing up for them, and the showing up, accumulated over years, becomes the relationship. Lenny and Carl have been showing up for each other since the first season. The bar, the plant, the various Springfield catastrophes that require collective navigation. They're present for each other in all of it, and the presence is so consistent that neither of them apparently questions it. It's simply the structure of their lives, the way things are. I sometimes think the show resisted confirming the nature of the relationship, not because it was frightened of what confirming would mean, but because confirmation would require treating the relationship as an event, a discovery, a declaration, a moment of before and after. And what the show has been depicting is precisely the opposite of an event. It's a condition, a long-established fact of 2 lives, something that doesn't have a beginning or a middle in the conventional narrative sense. It just is and has been and will continue to be. And the people inside it have never particularly needed anyone outside it to validate what it is. There's something worth saying about what all that shared proximity produces in the show's storytelling. Lenny and Carl are each individually fairly thin characters when they appear alone. Their jokes are plant worker jokes, their storylines are ancillary, their personalities are sketched rather than fully drawn. But when they appear together, something happens. They have a specific energy, a specific rhythm, a specific comfort with each other that doesn't exist when either is elsewhere. The show knows this. It deploys them together because individually they don't quite work, and together they do. That's a writing team acknowledging through 20 years of repeated choices that these 2 characters are constituted by their relationship in a way that makes them less than themselves apart from it. That's unusual for cartoon supporting characters. That's more like how writers describe the experience of writing real couples, that each character only becomes fully themselves in the presence of the other. The show built that, perhaps intentionally, perhaps because it grew into it over seasons of writing. And either way, the result is the same. Two people who complete each other in the specific way that only time and consistency can produce. Whether that's romantic or not almost stops mattering at a certain point. What it is real. And there's something worth sitting with in the fact that the show built this across its entire run without anyone in the writer's room apparently deciding it needed to be resolved or explained or turned into a story. It was allowed to be the background condition of two lives, the thing that was simply true season after season without requiring an episode to explain how it got there or where it was going. Most television can't do that. Most television needs relationships to generate story, conflict, development, resolution, the machinery of narrative progress. Lenny and Carl's relationship generates almost none of that. It just continues. They show up at the bar, they show up at the plant. They comment on Homer's disasters with a dry warmth that implies they've seen variations of this disaster many times before because they have. They go home, they come back. The relationship continues, generating nothing in narrative terms except the quiet warmth of two people who know where they stand. That's a rare thing to put on television, and the show did it largely by accident or largely by accumulated habit, or largely because the writers kept writing the dynamic, and eventually the dynamic had become decades old and turned into something else entirely by virtue of its duration. Whatever the cause, the effect is the same, a relationship portrait that you can only fully appreciate at the distance of decades. You can't see what Lenny and Carl are from a single episode. You can only see it from the length of the whole run, looked at all at once. And from that distance, it's quite something. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Every episode of The Simpsons contains somewhere within it a family that watches television together. This is not accidental. Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa on the couch in front of the screen is one of the most repeated images in the show's history. It's the show's default domestic image, the one it returns to constantly, the one that closes the opening credits of every episode. A family watching television. And within the show, the thing the family watches, the thing the children are most enthusiastic about, the show they arrange their schedule around, is Itchy and Scratchy. A cartoon about a mouse who kills a cat in increasingly elaborate, graphically violent ways, and a cat who dies and suffers and is dismembered, while the mouse laughs and the audience cheers. It is, within the fiction of The Simpsons, enormously popular. Bart and Lisa love it. They watch it with total absorption and genuine delight. Now, the show in which this happens is one you are watching right now. You are the higher level audience. And The Simpsons, for as long as it has been running, has been asking you a question it never quite phrases directly. What does it say about you that you find this funny? Let me be specific about what I mean, because the argument the show is making is a precise one, and it deserves to be handled carefully. Season 2, Episode 9. Itchy and Scratchy and Marge. Aired December 20th, 1990. In this episode, Marge decides that Itchy and Scratchy is too violent for children and campaigns to have the show's content changed. Her campaign is successful. Itchy and Scratchy is softened. The characters stop killing each other and instead wander peacefully through meadows. Children across Springfield turn off their televisions and go outside to play. It is, by Marge's measure, a complete success. Then someone asks Marge whether she'll use the same logic to oppose a traveling Michelangelo exhibit, specifically the statue of David, which contains nudity. And Marge, who campaigned against cartoon violence without hesitation, is entirely unable to apply the same principled art she considers high culture. She backs down. The exhibit proceeds. Her position is revealed as aesthetic, not principled. She objects to the kind of violence and content she finds culturally low, and defers to the kind she finds culturally elevated regardless of the underlying logic. The episode is making a very specific point. Your tolerance for violence and your tolerance for nudity and your tolerance for any kind of content is not principled. It is aesthetic. It is about what you've been taught to find acceptable in what context. Marge isn't wrong to object to what she objects to. She's wrong to think her objection is principled rather than cultural. And the show makes this point by showing you that the person with the principled seeming position collapses the moment it's applied to something she'd rather not apply it to. And then there's Season 8, Episode 14, The Itchy and Scratchy and Poochie Show. Aired February 9th, 1997. This episode is about network television cynically inserting a new character, Poochie, a radical skateboarding dog voiced by Homer, into a long-running show to boost sagging ratings. The character is instantly and universally despised. He is killed off within the episode. The show's showrunner, Roger Myers Jr., is pressured by focus groups and executives and the mechanics of ratings anxiety. And the result is something that pleases no one and damages the show it was supposed to help. The writers of The Simpsons wrote this episode about themselves, about their own show, about the specific pressures of keeping a long-running animated series viable in a commercial ecosystem that rewards novelty and punishes consistency. They made an episode of television that describes, in satirical form, the forces acting on The Simpsons and put it inside The Simpsons and broadcast it on Fox, the network those forces were operating through. This is the level of self-awareness the show was operating at in Season 8, and it is considerable. But come back to the basic structure. Bart and Lisa on the couch, watching a cat be destroyed in grotesque detail, cheering. Their delight is genuine. The show never judges them for it. The camera never pulls back to make a moralistic comment about children and violent entertainment. Their faces are open and happy and completely present in the experience of watching something terrible happen to something and finding it very funny. And you, watching The Simpsons, have almost certainly found Homer fall downstairs funny, have found Sideshow Bob step on a rake funny, have found various elaborate sequences of Homer being physically destroyed funny. The show puts Bart and Lisa on that couch watching the smaller screen, and it puts you on your couch watching the larger one, and it draws, quite deliberately, a line between those two positions. The argument the show has been making since 1990 is this. You are not a neutral consumer of comedy. Your laughter is not innocent. The things you find funny say something about you, and if those things involve the suffering and destruction of something, even a cartoon cat, even an animated Homer, then your laughter is participating in something, and you might want to think about what. The show never lands this as a verdict. It's not trying to make you feel guilty. It's trying to make you think, in the way good comedy sometimes does, about the nature of the contract between you and the thing making you laugh. What do you want from it? What it's giving you, whether those are the same thing. I think about this more than I probably should when I watch The Simpsons. And then Homer falls off something, and I laugh, and the circuit completes, and the show has made its point again without needing to say a word. But let me develop the Poochie episode a little further, because it's doing more than one thing, and all of them are interesting. The Itchy and Scratchy and Poochie Show aired in Season 8, the same season as Homer's Enemy, which is not coincidental. Season 8 is the season in which The Simpsons was most visibly self-critical. It's the season where the writers, at what most people consider the height of their powers, chose to spend a significant amount of creative energy examining what a show at the height of its powers looks like from the inside and what can go wrong with it. The specific thing Poochie satirizes is the notes process, the focus group, the executive intervention. The Poochie character is created not because anyone with creative investment in the show wanted a skateboarding radical dog. He is created because a network graphic shows declining interest in a particular demographic, and a committee responds to that graphic by designing a solution. The solution is inevitably wrong, because solutions designed by committee in response to demographic data rather than by people who love the thing they're making tend to be wrong. The Simpsons knew this. It had experienced versions of it. The Poochie episode was partly a preemptive defense of the creative values the show was operating under, and partly a genuine expression of anxiety about what happens when those values get eroded by the commercial machinery around them. Homer voices Poochie, and Homer's approach to the role, with genuine enthusiasm, complete sincerity, and total absence of self-awareness about what the character needs to be, is the show making a second joke inside the first one. The creator who loves the thing but has no understanding of what the thing actually requires can be just as damaging as the committee that doesn't love it. Passion without craft is its own kind of problem. Roger Myers Jr., the head of the fictional I&S studio, is a recurring character across the show's run. He's venal, mercenary, and primarily motivated by money. His creative relationship with Itchy and Scratchy is purely commercial. He has no affection for the material, no interest in what it does beyond what it earns. And the show uses him repeatedly to make the argument that commercial indifference and commercial pressure produce the same results. Content that serves no one's actual interest, including the audience's. The Marge episode, Itchy and Scratchy and Marge, circles back to this. The improved, violence-free Itchy and Scratchy is broadly ignored. Children stop watching it and go outside, which Marge registers as a success, but which the show frames as neutral at best. The kids didn't become better people because the cartoon stopped being violent. They just found other things to do until the violence came back, which it eventually did, and they came back to it. The behavior change wasn't cultural, it was practical. When the thing you like is available, you watch it. When it's not, you find something else. The content of the content matters less than the discourse around it would suggest. This is a quietly cynical argument about media reform, and the show makes it without flinching. The efforts to change what children watch in this episode are depicted as having essentially no lasting effect on the children. The children are fine either way. What was changed was Marge's sense of agency, which was real and which she valued, and which was then compromised by the Michelangelo question. The episode is about Marge, not about violent cartoons. It's about the specific psychology of a person who channels her anxieties into campaigns, and what happens when a campaign succeeds and then the logic of the campaign is applied somewhere inconvenient. The show is genuinely rigorous about this. It doesn't mock Marge, it follows the logic of her position to its conclusion and shows you what the conclusion is. That's harder to do than it looks, and it's part of why the episode holds up 35 years later. There's one more piece of the Itchy and Scratchy universe I want to mention before we move on, which is the Gabbo arc from Season 5. Gabbo is a ventriloquist's dummy, a new entertainer who takes Springfield by storm and pulls the audience away from Krusty's show, including away from Itchy and Scratchy. The show treats Gabbo's popularity as a straightforward disruption narrative. New competitor appears, established program suffers, various attempts to respond ensue. But the Gabbo arc is also doing something more specific, which is documenting what happens to children's attention when something new appears on a screen. The Springfield children don't stop watching television when Gabbo arrives. They just redirect their attention toward the new thing. The content of the new thing is almost irrelevant. It's new, it's novel, the novelty is the appeal. And then the novelty fades, and the original thing is still there, and attention redistributes again. This is the show observing its own audience with unusual candor. It knows that its audience's loyalty is not unconditional. It knows that novelty is a competitor that doesn't require being better. It only requires being different. And it knows that the response to novelty isn't to change what you are, but to survive the novelty until the attention redistributes. That's a quite honest account of how long-running television actually works, and the show put it in a Season 5 arc about a ventriloquist's dummy. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Ralph Wiggum is Springfield's designated non sequitur. That's the conventional function he serves. The The strange kid who says things that don't connect to anything, whose contributions to scenes are reliably bizarre, who exists in the show as a kind of ambient weirdness generator. He has been doing this since season 3, with gradually increasing frequency, and the comedy of him is reliable and consistent and has never really worn out. But here's something I'd like to try. Collect everything Ralph has said across the show's history, set aside the question of whether it's funny, and ask a different question. Is it accurate? And the answer, far more often than you'd expect, is yes. Let me start with the most cited example, because it earns its place here. Ralph, alone in a car with Sideshow Bob, a convicted felon who has attempted to kill multiple people, turns to the camera and says, "I'm in danger." He is completely correct. He is the only character in the scene who is processing the situation accurately. The comedy of the moment is that it sounds like a non sequitur, like Ralph is doing the Ralph thing. But he's not. He's reporting. He looked at his situation and described it with complete accuracy. The joke only works because the audience, like the other characters, has learned to expect Ralph's statements to be disconnected from reality. So when they're connected, the connection reads as absurdity rather than observation. That specific flip, something accurate being received as irrational, is when you look for it, Ralph's defining characteristic. It's not that he's wrong, it's that he lacks the social awareness to perform the kind of selective reality acknowledgement that everyone else in Springfield does automatically. Consider Springfield itself for a moment. We talked at the beginning of this video about the ways the show documents the town's insulation from consequence, its collective agreement to not look at certain things directly. The residents of Springfield are in aggregate quite good at not noticing things. They are practiced at the social management of what they acknowledge versus what they let pass. Frank Grimes, as we talked about, was destroyed by his inability to participate in that management. He saw things and said what he saw, and Springfield couldn't tolerate it. Ralph sees things and says what he sees, and Springfield can tolerate it because he's a child, and because he's Ralph, and because the things he says are packaged in a register. The Ralph register, the disconnected kid register, that lets everyone in the room categorize them as innocuous. He gets away with his accuracy because nobody takes it seriously as accuracy. Now consider Ralph's household. His father is Chief Clancy Wiggum, Springfield's chief of police and one of its most comprehensively corrupt officials. Wiggum takes bribes, loses evidence, investigates his friend's crimes with convenient incompetence, and operates the Springfield Police Department as a personal fiefdom rather than a public service. He does all of this openly enough that it's essentially common knowledge, but it's common knowledge in the specifically Springfield sense. Everyone knows, nobody says anything directly. The gap between the official story and the operational reality is navigated through a kind of collective, silent agreement. Ralph has grown up in that household. He was raised in a home where what is said and what is true are routinely different things, where the official narrative and the actual events exist in consistent tension, where a child who paid close attention would notice very early that the world as described and the world as experienced don't quite match. Ralph paid close attention, and his response to that discrepancy was not, as Grimes's was, to try to force the gap closed. His response was just to describe things as he saw them, without the social filter that would have told him not to. The result is someone who sounds strange because he's not performing the socially necessary selection process that everyone else performs constantly. He's not filtering for what's appropriate to say in this context. He's just saying what's there. Season 4, Episode 15. I Love Lisa, February 11th, 1993. Ralph gives Lisa a card, the I Choo-Choo-Choose You card, with complete, unguarded sincerity. He has noticed that he has feelings. He has communicated them directly. No irony, no management, no performance of casual indifference. Just, I feel this, so I'm saying it. The scene is played partly for comedy and partly for something warmer, and Lisa's eventual cruelty about it on national television becomes genuinely uncomfortable to watch because Ralph's honesty has been so complete and so undefended. That undefended quality is the thing. Most people, by the age Ralph is supposed to be, have learned to protect themselves in social situations, have learned that feelings expressed fully and directly are vulnerable to consequences. Ralph has not learned this. He hasn't been socialized out of complete honesty. Whether that's a developmental characteristic or a coping mechanism or something else entirely, the show never explains. But the effect is consistent. Ralph tells you what he sees without editing. The Frank Grimes comparison is worth making one more time. Two characters who see Springfield clearly. One of them is a competent adult who tries to leverage his clarity against the system and is destroyed. One of them is a child whose clarity is dismissed as incoherence and who floats through Springfield unharmed. The show is quite specific about this. The difference isn't what they see, it's what they do with it and what resources the people around them have for handling it. Ralph doesn't threaten anyone. His accuracy goes nowhere. It's said, and then it's a punchline, and then the scene moves on. And he keeps going, season after season, describing things as they are, not realizing that what he's describing is unusual, not understanding that most people in his town have chosen not to see exactly what he's seeing. He just keeps looking and keeps saying what he sees, and it keeps being funny. And occasionally, when you catch the right line in the right episode at the right moment, it's something else as well. Let me talk about Ralph's relationship with the other children, because it's genuinely peculiar, and I think it maps something real. Ralph is not quite bullied. He is not Milhouse, who has an established social position as Bart's friend and occasional target, and who navigates a recognizable childhood social hierarchy. He is not Martin Prince, who is bullied with intent and consistency by Jimbo and Kearney and their associates. Ralph occupies a different space. The other children mostly leave him alone. They don't know what to do with him. Bart sometimes interacts with him with a kind of exasperated affection. Nelson has a grudging respect for him that the show occasionally acknowledges. But Ralph is not socially integrated in any conventional sense. He is in the room, but not of the room. This is, again, accurate. Children who lack the social filter, who say what they see without processing it through the expectations of the peer group, don't tend to be integrated into conventional peer group structures. They're too unpredictable. You can't manage a social situation with someone who might say anything at any moment with complete sincerity, regardless of whether the thing is appropriate or desired. The other children have learned unconsciously that Ralph doesn't operate on the same social rules they do, and their response is not hostility but a kind of careful distance. He's there. He's fine. He's just not participating in the same social project they're all participating in. And here's the thing about that social project. The social project is learning how to read a room, what to say, what to keep to yourself, how to manage what you let show and what you don't. It's the project that every person in Springfield is engaged in at various levels of competence. Some do it better than others. All of them do it. Ralph, as far as the show presents, doesn't do it at all. He has an inner life. There is clearly a Ralph who feels things, responds to things, wants things. The I choose you episode demonstrates this beyond any reasonable doubt. The depth of feeling in that card, the sincerity of the gesture, the complete absence of the protective layer of cool that his classmates were already beginning to develop at that age. Ralph felt it and communicated it without modification. And the consequences were what the consequences often are for unmodified emotional expression in childhood. Immediate vulnerability, followed by humiliation. Most children take that lesson and build the filter. You feel something. You don't automatically say the feeling. You think about whether the feeling is appropriate for this context, whether it will be received well, whether the person you feel it about will use it against you or appreciate it. Ralph didn't take that lesson. He kept going. He kept feeling things and saying them, and occasionally being hurt, and apparently not fundamentally altering the behavior that led to the hurt. Whether this is because Ralph doesn't learn that way, or because something in him won't close the gap between feeling and expression, even when closing it would be self-protective, the show never quite says. But the consistency of it across every season he appears in suggests it's not a temporary state. It's just how Ralph is, completely exposed, completely honest, completely present in whatever he's experiencing, saying it out loud in front of everyone. In a town like Springfield, which, as we've talked about tonight, runs largely on collective agreements about what to acknowledge and what not to, Ralph is a structural anomaly. Not dangerous like Grimes was, not strategic like Bob is, just present and honest and saying the thing season after season. I find him, the more I think about it, one of the show's more quietly remarkable creations, a child-sized hole in Springfield's social fabric through which the truth occasionally falls. Because a character who is genuinely, structurally incapable of not telling the truth exists in direct contrast to every other character in Springfield. Every other character in this show, every single one, tells partial truths at best. They manage information, they perform stability, they maintain the social agreements that keep Springfield's equilibrium intact. That is the normal condition of living in the Springfield that Frank Grimes encountered and was destroyed by. Ralph doesn't participate in that condition. Not because he's brave, not because he's chosen resistance, but simply because the cognitive and social machinery that performs the condition doesn't appear to be running in him. He says the thing because it's the thing. No filter, no edit, no awareness that the thing is unusual to say. He is, in his completely unintentional way, the most radically honest person in town. And the town has found a perfectly comfortable way to make that harmless, which is to find him funny, which, to be fair, he is. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Santa's Little Helper appeared on December 17th, 1989, the first episode, the very first night the show was ever broadcast, and he has been in almost every episode since, not always centrally, not always with dialogue or action or any particular plot function, but present, in the corner of the room, on the couch, in the background of a yard scene, somewhere in the frame, consistent across more episodes than almost any other show in television history. There's something I want to say about the specific way this character was introduced because the detail of it matters, and I think people don't sit with it enough. In Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire, the first episode, Homer is at a Greyhound racing track with Bart, having spent what was supposed to be the family's Christmas money. They are there because Homer didn't get his annual Christmas bonus from the plant, couldn't tell Marge, and needed the money. He bets on a dog called Santa's Little Helper. The dog comes last. The race is done. And as Homer and Bart are leaving, defeated, they see the dog's owner approach the animal after its loss and push it away, disowning it on the spot. The dog runs to Homer and Bart. Homer looks at the dog. Homer takes the dog home. Homer's first act as a canonical character on this show, the first choice he makes that defines who he is he sees something the system has finished with, and he takes it home. Think about what that mirrors. The retirement castle, which we talked about earlier in this video. The place where Springfield stores the people it has finished with. The Greyhound racing industry, which produces dogs for performance and discards them when the performance ends. The plant, which keeps Homer employed despite his incompetence for reasons that have more to do with his position in a network than his contribution to it. The show is full of systems that have a use and discard logic. And Homer, whose relationship with systems is at best complicated, responds in this first moment by taking the discarded thing home. The tragedy, and it is one in a low-key way, is that the Simpsons don't always treat Santa's Little Helper with the same instinct that caused them to adopt him. The dog has been sold to Mr. Burns. The dog has been given away. The dog has been sent to obedience school after a behavioral episode and returned. The pattern repeats, and there's one episode that captures the specific mechanism of it more precisely than any other, which we'll get to in a moment. What Santa's Little Helper does across the show's run is remain constant. That's his function, and it's a more significant function than it might initially appear. He is not affected by the floating timeline, not aged into decrepitude, not fundamentally changed by the events of individual episodes. He is, in the Simpson household, the most consistent presence. He offers the same thing every day, regardless of what he receives. He doesn't hold grievances. He doesn't require emotional management. He is simply there, available, with the same quality of presence every time. And in the scenes where the Simpson family is at its most fractured, the arguments, the crises, the moments of genuine family disintegration that the show depicts with more accuracy than its comedy framing, sometimes lets you notice the dog is often in the frame, in the corner, not doing anything, just being there, in the way that dogs are there without the complexity that human presence brings. I've started to think of Santa's Little Helper as the show's baseline instrument, a way of measuring the emotional temperature of the family at any given moment. When Homer's at his lowest, the dog is often nearby. When the family is managing something real, there's usually a cut to the dog at some point, being the thing that doesn't require managing. His presence in those moments isn't incidental. The writers put him there deliberately, and the choice they're making with that placement every time is, here is the one uncomplicated thing in this house. Because the Simpson family as a unit finds love complicated, not in a dramatic way, in the ordinary, quotidian way that actual families find it complicated. Homer's love for Marge is real but inconsistent. His love for his children is genuine but poorly expressed. Marge's love is deep but often carries the burden of being the person who has to make everything work. The children love each other in the combative, competitive way siblings do. Everyone in that house loves everyone else, and none of them quite manages to make it look easy. Santa's Little Helper makes it look easy. He has made it look easy since 1989. He loves The Simpsons with complete consistency, completely regardless of whether they deserve it in any given episode, completely regardless of whether they're attentive to him or distracted, or have financially pressured themselves into giving him away. He returns to them every time with the same quality of attention and the same openness and the same uncomplicated readiness to be present with them. That's the thing the show put in the corner of the room in its very first episode. Unconditional love, just sitting there in the background, available whenever someone in the family was ready to notice it. In all the years since, the family has sometimes noticed it, sometimes they haven't. And he's been there either way, exactly as he was the night Homer brought him home from the racetrack, because the man who was supposed to care for him had decided he wasn't worth keeping. The most precise demonstration of what that costs and what it produces comes from Season 3, Episode 19, Dog of Death. It aired March 12, 1992. The setup, Santa's Little Helper is diagnosed with a serious medical condition requiring surgery. The surgery costs a significant amount of money. The Simpson family, already financially stretched, faces a choice: pay for the surgery or don't. What follows is a careful depiction of what financial stress does to a family's effective reserves. Each family member gives up something they value to contribute to the vet bill. Homer gives up his lottery tickets. Marge reduces the grocery budget. Bart gives up his allowance. Lisa gives up her newspaper subscription. The sacrifices are real, and the resentment that builds around them is real. Small acts of deprivation compound into a general ambient irritability that finds its focus in the dog, who is alive because of the deprivation and who, of course, has no understanding of this. The family begins to resent Santa's Little Helper. The episode depicts this without much sentimentality. They become short with him, impatient, less attentive. The warmth that was the condition of his presence in the house starts to cool. And when the family eventually decides the situation is unsustainable, They give him to Burns, who trains him as an attack dog. The attack dog training is thorough and intentionally cruel. It replaces the dog's behavior patterns systematically, drives out the gentleness, installs aggression, makes him something he wasn't. And when the family eventually comes to reclaim him, the dog they find is not quite the same dog they gave away. He comes back, he returns to them. But the training is in him. The experience of the Burns kennel is in him. Something was done to him during the period when the family couldn't afford to want him, and it can't be fully undone. The episode resolves happily. Comedy, cartoon logic, the status quo reasserts, but the specific mechanism the show used to create the crisis, financial pressure causing emotional withdrawal, causing actual harm to a creature that depended on the family's care, is not really resolved by the comedy, it's covered by it. The resolution is the show moving on, not the show demonstrating that the underlying conditions have changed. And this is, I think, the most honest moment in all of Santa's Little Helper's appearances. Because what the Dog of Death episode shows you is that unconditional love, as a concept, is fine as far as it goes. But what dogs and people and relationships actually need is the conditions that make care possible. The conditions were absent for a period, the dog paid for it, the family got him back, and the show proceeded. There's one more Santa's Little Helper storyline I want to mention because it connects to something larger about the show's use of this character. In season 4, the dog has puppies, a litter of them, following a romance with a show dog named She's the Fastest. Homer, faced with the financial and practical burden of a litter, attempts to give them away, and the episode becomes about the family's response to surplus love and the difficulty of distributing it. What the puppies storyline does in the context of everything we've talked about tonight is extend the adoption motif. Homer adopted a discarded animal in the first episode. Now that animal has produced more animals that need homes, and Homer's instinct, under financial and practical pressure, is to find a way to not have them. The cycle starts again, something that needs care, a family that isn't sure it can provide it, a resolution that requires the family to stretch slightly beyond their comfort zone. The show keeps returning to this shape with this character. It's not subtle about what it's doing. The dog, who was himself discarded and adopted, produces life that requires adoption. The family that adopted him is asked repeatedly to decide whether care is something they can afford. And each time, somehow they manage. Not perfectly, not without difficulty, but they manage. I think this is the show's most honest argument, distributed quietly across decades in the background of a comedy about a dysfunctional family. That the capacity for care is more durable than people believe it is. That a family like The Simpsons, chaotic, often selfish, frequently absent from each other's actual needs, still manages, somehow, to keep the dog, to bring him back from burns, to pay for the surgery eventually, to return to him season after season with the same basic openness he returns to them with. They're not good at it. They fail regularly, but they keep doing it. The continuity is a thing, not the quality of the individual acts of care, but the persistence of the relationship across all the failures. That's what the dog represents. That's what the show was putting in the corner of the room in December 1989 and hasn't taken away since. An image of something that keeps going. Imperfectly, inconsistently, but continuously, in a house full of people who love each other in the complicated, inadequate, genuine way that actual families love each other. There's a closing image I keep coming back to. The Simpson family in some kind of argument, one of the hundreds the show has depicted over its run. Loud, chaotic, everyone talking at once the way actual families do when the pressure builds. And somewhere in the background of the frame, on the couch, or in the corner, the greyhound, not participating, not required to, just present, in the patient way of something that has decided the people it loves are worth waiting for. The show put that image in the corner of every room for the entirety of its run. I think it was trying to say something with it. I think it still is. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. We started tonight with a specific kind of experience, the one where you go back to something you've known your whole life and find something in it that wasn't there before, or was always there, and you're only now seeing it. That's what I mean when I say these things get darker every time you revisit them. Not darker in the sense of grim revelations or hidden horror. Darker in the sense that the show becomes more itself the more you know it. The portraits become clearer. The patterns become more visible. The detail accumulates across hundreds of episodes and all those years. And at some point, the detail is the thing. Not the comedy, not the plots, not the jokes you can recite from memory. The detail is the show telling you something it has been trying to say since December 1989. Frank Grimes told you something about how systems protect their own. The stonecutter showed you the diagram of that protection. Abe Simpson sits in a retirement home and tells his stories to anyone who will half listen, because the son who put him there was never given the tools to listen properly, because nobody gave them to Abe either. Maud Flanders died because Homer moved to catch a free t-shirt, and Ned spent a decade carrying that in a framework that required him to call it God's will. Rod and Todd are growing up slowly in a beautiful, spotless house, drawn to the sound of the television through the wall, unsure whether they're allowed to want to hear it. Sideshow Bob keeps stepping on the same rake because the rake, and the pain of it and getting up again, is better than facing what there is without it. Lenny and Carl built a whole life in proximity to each other long before the vocabulary arrived to describe it. The cartoon cat on the smaller screen and you on your couch watching the larger one are the same audience, and the show knows it. Ralph Wiggum says true things in a register everyone has agreed to treat as incoherence. And a greyhound has been sitting in the corner of a room in Springfield since the very first night, offering the same uncomplicated thing over and over, waiting to be noticed. The show drew all of this carefully. It took 37 years and 800 episodes and a lot of very precise writing. It built these people and these patterns with enough care that the care only becomes fully visible at a certain distance, a certain familiarity, a certain accumulation of revisits. That's why we keep going back to it. Not just nostalgia, not just comfort, not just the familiar voices in the familiar house. Because the house has things in it, things you didn't see the first time and saw partly the second time and understood more fully the third time. And you can keep going back and keep finding things because the show is built with enough depth that the depth doesn't run out. The couch, the family, the opening credits you've seen 1,000 times, the theme you could hum in your sleep, all of it's still there. All of it still meaning something. The greyhound in the corner, patient as ever, still